the morning to you. Welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay. The headlines. Moscow high-rise building hit by alleged drone attack, blamed on Ukraine. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu says Ukraine desperately hurling new forces into attacks on Russian positions and failed. Plus, members of the United Nations Secret Council urges Russia to withdraw its troops from Ukraine's internationally recognized territory. Thank you for joining us. Buildings in central Moscow were damaged and their glasses shattered, that is, their windows, earlier today, as Russia's capital became the target of another alleged attack from drones. The Russian military said its anti-aircraft units had thwarted Ukraine's terrorist attack and the downed drones targeting Moscow, but one drone sent out of control by its units struck the same high-rise tower hit earlier in the week. Moskva city was hit by a drone attack last Sunday, one of several such incidents which have caused limited damage but generated widespread unease in Russia. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said the day following the incident that Ukrainian attacks on Moscow and other Russian targets were acts of desperation and that Russia was taking all measures possible to protect against such strikes. The death toll from the Russian attack on the southern city of Kryvyi Rih has risen to 6. A 6-year-old, that is a 10-year-old girl, and her mother were killed in that attack. The victims, including several others, were buried under rubble. A video posted by the State Emergency Services online showed smoke bellowing from a gaping hole smashed in the side of a 9-story residential building, with rescuers carrying a body bag from the scene. Regional Governor Sihi Lisak wrote on the Telegram Messenger app that 4 people had died, while Mayor Alexandra Vilkul says they included a 10-year-old girl and her 45-year-old mother. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has described that attack in Ukraine as terrorism. He added that more than 350 emergency and communal services workers were involved in the rescue operations, which is now completed. The Ukrainian leader also emphasized the need to have enough long-range weapons and enough equipment to defeat terrorists.
This is terrorism, which no one in the world will call otherwise. As of now, it is known about 6 dead, including a child, a girl. Her name was Daya. She was only 10 years old. Her mother died with her. 69 people were hurt. Dozens are now in hospitals. Some of them are in serious condition.
Volodymyr Zelensky, president of Ukraine. In the meantime, 1 person has been killed and 2 others have been injured in a rocket attack on the southern city of Kherson. Kherson's regional administration also published footage online showing a body dressed in working overalls lying on the street, adding that 4 people were injured. The regional administration identified the victim as a 60-year-old city worker, saying that people were doing their work, made the city cozy and comfortable, and then they came under fire. Russia says that Ukraine's counteroffensive was not going as planned and that it was wasting billions of dollars of weapons supplied to it by the West. Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, in remarks to a military conference, said Ukraine was desperately hurling new forces into attacks on Russian positions and had failed to advance. Ukraine says it has made gradual progress, though more slowly than it would like, since launching its long-anticipated counter-offensive in early June against the well-entrenched Russian positions. After 17 months of the conflict, Ukraine is under pressure to achieve significant gains on the battlefield after taking delivery of Western tanks, rocket systems, and other hardware, and to ensure that NATO countries don't flag in their support. Russia, for that reason, has repeatedly portrayed the counteroffensive as a failure, even though it's still in its very early stages. Ukrainian armed forces published a video which it said showed Ukrainian troops striking Russian howitzer, self-propelled artillery units and communication infrastructure in the Donetsk region. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky described Sunday, July the 30th as a good day, a powerful day at the front, particularly near Bakhmut, where Ukrainian forces say they are retaking ground lost when Russian forces took the city in May. Ukrainian Deputy Minister Hanna Malia told national television the Russians' key task was to divert our forces from the Bakhmut area, where we have a successful offensive. Ukraine last month launched a counter-offensive focusing on southward campaign to drive a wedge between Russian forces holding territory in the east and the annexed Crimean Peninsula, and on winning back ground around Bakhmut. Ukrainian troops that took Staromorsky, which is a village in Ukraine, said it was tough and shared their experience by training reinforcements to storm enemy positions and to blend with the greenery. Last week, Kyiv said its forces had liberated the village in the southeast in a campaign that aims to cut Russia's land bridge from the east to the south and the occupied peninsula of Crimea on the Black Sea. Russia, which launched its full-scale invasion in February 2022, holds vast swathes of territory and has built up a network of fortifications and minefields to make it hard for Ukrainian troops to advance.
Крию! Крию, крию!
Now let's talk to global affairs analyst Edward Akwa, who joins us from Dallas, Texas, in the United States. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Well, thank you for having me.
Could we begin with the latest drone strikes and the fact that they seem to be penetrating the Russian air defenses, though it's a trickle compared to what's happening from the Russians in Ukraine? It's a big worry. Does this send any signal of Ukraine being able to now be more accurate and to penetrate these defenses further down the road, as Russia says that they have the situation well in hand?
Well, war propaganda is war propaganda. Every side is going to claim a victory and success in whatever weapons they're using. So what you're saying is Ukraine saying, yeah, we're making progress, we're penetrating Russian defenses, and Russia is going to counter and say, well, you're not doing as you claim to be doing. So that is what's going on. I think the West is sort of perplexed that of all the support that they're giving Ukraine and with NATO supporting them, not so much progress has been made. I think we've lost the ability to have a diplomatic solution to this kind of war, and so America is shocked. The members of NATO are shocked. Nobody knows what is enabling Russia to be able to stand up to sort of the global support that the Ukraine has been given, and the war doesn't seem to have an end in sight. So the propaganda goes on.
Go on, please. Go on, please.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, please go on.
I'm sorry. What? I'm sorry, what did you say?
I said you should please go ahead. Continue.
No, yeah, I'm just saying that, we are on the American side. We see this every day. We see the amount of ammunition and money that's been given to Ukraine. But, remember when this war started, we were told, just like when it started in Iraq, that it was going to be a matter of months. Now we are more than a year into it, and nobody knows what's going on. And nobody can come and say for sure this is what Ukraine needs in order to do what? To win the war with Russia. I am of the opinion that the two sides still need to get together and sit down and say, what is the solution? What will get this thing to an end? Because I can guarantee you in the next one year, we'll be fighting this war. I don't know whether, Biden wants this thing to linger on so that during the presidential time, most Americans have won war if the president that started it is in office. So there's all kinds of things that you have to be suspecting between these two sides. But the people that are dying, the buildings, the physical things that have been destroyed, somebody's still going to, at least Ukraine can be rebuilt after or Russia, but the lives that are going to be lost, how are you going to get them back? So this war is not going to end in the next 1 or 2 years until the Russian side and the Ukraine side get together and let these people decide what is the solution that will suit them.
To pick up partially on what you said that a diplomatic means of resolution of this conflict seems pretty not feasible at this point. But Saudi Arabia seems to be in the mix as far as that is concerned now. Aside from the visit of the Ukrainian officials to Saudi Arabia, now there seems to be a peace summit that will hold in Saudi Arabia, that they said they will invite countries such as Brazil, possibly China, but not Russia. Do you think Saudi Arabia will be able to do what the Chinese couldn't do what the African peace mission could not do, achieve what Brazil did not achieve, and the other European nations that wanted peace?
Well, again, you look at these things and you shake your head. Saudi's trying to, insert itself on the world stage, thinking they are going to be relevant. I don't know of anything that is going on in the world that the Saudis have been successful at getting done. You see what is going on in Yemen, and they haven't been able to resolve that. The issue between Qatar and Saudi is still going on. So everybody tries to go in to say, oh, we're going to be the one that brings solution to this. Some African countries went to Russia. It ended up being a joke. So again, the two people that are suffering, the two nations that are suffering, have to be the ones that decide, look, everybody, take a back seat. This is a war between us, even though egos are in place. Let us come together and talk about what is it that they're fighting for. Is it access to mineral? Is it access to, ego? But it's mineral. Okay, fine. What are we fighting for? What is the value of this mineral? Can we have a shared agreement so that, you get 40%, I get 60 or 50-50 or 90-10? At the end of the day, I am sort of perplexed and shocked that in the 21st century, we're still having something like this. This is sort of thing that I would have thought, back in the 17th, 18th century. But in the 21st century, the two neighbors, what is that saying about love thy neighbor? How come Russia and Ukraine cannot love their neighbor? Why do we have to have China, America, everybody else coming in to tell two neighbors this is what you need to do? So there's a lot of ego in it, but the unfortunate part is the civilians that are getting killed and the destruction that is going on, and then the impact that he said is having on the whole world. So again, I don't know. United Nations obviously is not very effective, because I haven't seen any resolution that has brought peace to any part of the world because of UN. So it makes you wonder, for all these organizations that we have, the summits, the meetings, all kinds of committees getting together, what is going to be the solution? Why are we still having wars, unnecessary wars in 21st century? So back to your question, I don't think Saudi is going to do anything except, to get on the stage because, they have some money because of oil, but they're not relevant. Saudi Arabia is not a relevant nation as far as I'm concerned when it comes to global conflict.
You asked two questions in your answer, and those are million-dollar questions. Let's call them $800 million questions progressively. That That's the money that in U.S. aid that is being funneled to Ukraine in weapons, in cash, or not, or what have you. For instance, U.S. aid have talked about making the energy grid of Ukraine more resilient as the winter is almost upon them, just like last year, to make this year a more prepared position for Ukraine against the Russians should they decide to again attack the energy infrastructure. But since you're in the United States, Mr. Okwa, maybe you will help us to understand further the U.S.'s position. The U.S. has been accused of using this as a proxy war. That has been well shared around the world. And it hasn't helped none that the United States has continually funneled weapons and assistance to Ukraine and are not always at the forefront of any peace effort. Now, the Republicans and the Democrats seem to have a consensus that Ukraine is the victim of Russian aggression, and everything must be done to save the free world, as it were. But is there any dissent within the Republican Party as to how much aid is getting to Ukraine from the United States?
Well, I mean, it has always been the case. I think the Republican Party doesn't like this war. I mean, you know, but again, it's a Democrat that is a president, and so, of course, they don't have to back their own, back the president. But the point I'm saying that this war didn't start yesterday. The war has been going on for more than a year. And we have seen, despite all the resources that have been given to Ukraine, monetarily and weapon-wise, not much progress has been made. And so it makes you wonder, every war in the recent years that America have gotten into, have they been any successful resolution? You see what happened in Iraq, Afghanistan, and the withdrawal that has led to all kinds of things being said, why America shouldn't or should have. So I think, America should start to use their resources effectively to prevent these things and not to just take a side, because, again, they haven't been very successful in ending any war. And then even as we speak, in America, we have our own social crisis. You watch the video all the time. You see homelessness here. You see people doing all kinds of riots. So here you are, your house is on the fire. You're trying to put a fire out in somebody's house. So isn't that a deceptive kind of things we are doing as a nation? Do we have to be the policeman of the world everywhere we show up, and then sometimes we get chased out, or we have this egg on our face? So, again, I'm this sort of individual that I've never liked the war. I was a child of the war during Nigeria, and I never liked it. But what could I do when I was 67 years old? So here I am now in America, and every little thing, American troops go. I mean, you have Americans who have to die, who get wounded. America has some of the most disabled people in the world because of wars they have fought in other people's backyard. We have people in wheelchairs who have lost legs and arms and eyes and all kinds of things going on. Why? Because somebody feels, we have to go over there and police somebody, or we have to go over there and do this. So back to your comment, the Republicans don't like it. Remember, before this time, everybody was thinking that Ukraine is a very corrupt country. And so it's corrupt, and then you're giving them more resources, and they're still not showing that they're able to do anything. It's a proxy war because America wants to, put their finger on the face of Russia. I'm not saying Russia is doing it right either, but I'm just saying sometimes you may have to just let these things, take a course of its own. And then maybe we can learn a lesson, but not after every time of incident in different countries we show up. Thank God we haven't put American soldiers on the ground in Ukraine, because that would have escalated the war. But I'm just saying that sometimes nations have to be very responsible. Russia hasn't been responsible. Ukraine hasn't been responsible. And Ukraine is showing that, if you give somebody tools who doesn't know how to use it, they're not going to be successful. So remember, there was a recent announcement where the president said, they're going to give them F-15 fighters. That's going to take 18 months to train Ukrainians, before they can use that. So what good is it going to do? You can give Ukraine every equipment they need. They're still not making any progress that is going to bring peace. Again, the two sides have to come back together and sit at the table. Russia, the Russian guy and the Ukrainian guy, I don't like to mention their name. I'm so offended by what they do that I don't want to call their name. But get together. What is it that you're looking for? What do you want? Isn't that how sometimes you resolve issues even with your own family? What do you want? But then America comes in because they want to flex their ego, and then China on the other side is supporting Russia because China wants to go after Taiwan. Who knows? This is maybe how China is testing the strength of America. And then America is depleting its weapon because we haven't produced a lot in the past few years. Now we give it what we have. So what if China were to attack Taiwan now, then America has two things on their hand and they don't have the resources to do it. That's why the Republican side is saying, we don't want this war, let it end. But then the Democrat, the president.
Yeah, well, except every Ukrainian pilot that will be trained will be like Tom Cruise in the fictional character in Top Gun and be a maverick. 18 months, as you say, exactly, 18 months, as you say, is a long time. And it's a tall order to have these pilots ready. We even heard earlier that it was up to 6 months before it will be as limited as 6 months. But now you're telling us 18 months, and that seems to be quite realistic. So they can't put their eggs in one basket, in that basket. Mr. Okwa, can you tell us about the United States where you are? President Joe Biden has been criticized by obviously those of the other divide, the Republicans, the independents, that his Bidenomics policies are not working. And Bidenomics obviously has meant criticism of their import-export policies with Russia, the fact that gas gets expensive in the United States, how they're dealing with their oil, and obviously the southern border situation and the migrant crisis, which many have not called a crisis yet, but which the other side say it's a huge crisis. Does the United States have can they afford to continue to support Ukraine?
Well, I've said it, that we can't afford to do it because, again, we have social issues going on. I live in Texas, and, Texas has a border with Mexico. You see what our governor is doing, he's forced our hands to go in there and try to prevent, these people from coming in, crossing the border. And then the federal government, U.S. government said they're going to sue Texas. Because they have no right to do it. It's because the federal government has failed in its duty about immigration. Immigration is an exclusive right of the federal government. But when you are getting, infiltrated, Texas or America is our home. Let me ask you the question. How many people like their home to be invaded by other people? I came to America legally. I came through the front door. That is the best way to come to America. But when you jump in the fence and breaking into somebody's home, what do you think they should do? They're going to fight back. They're going to resist you. We have guns. Nobody should get into my home without being invited. So that's what is going on with the southern crisis and the border crisis. And then you talk about the economy. I live here. I'm in economic development. I do real estate, and I drive around. You see a lot of empty buildings. So you see, again, what you have seen in America is oftentimes a deceptive statistics that is put by any side that is empowered to say they are doing well. People are suffering in America. Of course, gas now, when I fill my tank, instead of doing it for $40, I'm doing it at $80 or $70 something, depending on the grade of gas I'm buying. So we have to come back. Nations now have to be more responsive and more responsible to themselves. Again, injecting what is going on in Nigeria, the fuel subsidy, the new president came in. I don't know what he was thinking or who was advising him. He pulled that out. And now there are a lot of Nigerians are complaining, a lot of Nigerians are suffering. So what makes people want to go into office if they're not going to solve a problem? The most important thing leadership do is to solve problems, not to make themselves look like heroes where they start giving medals to themselves, but to look at the common person in that particular country and say, hey, how can I ameliorate the situation? It's not for them. It's not about how big their cars are or how big is their mansion. It's how can I elevate a bunch of people in that particular population set to make them have a better life. And I don't see any country doing it. America hasn't been doing it in the past 1 or 2 decades. Of course, Nigeria is a basket case based on what Obama called it one time, and then China is throwing their weight around. I'm just saying, there are how many countries in the world? People supposed to guard their country. It's your home. When you take your country as your home, you're going to have an additional responsibility and an additional commitment not to have it violated by anybody from within or from without. But that's not what is going on. A lot of people are looking to, if there's a crisis going on in any particular country, they jump into UN. Since UN has been formed, 1948 to date, can anybody successful point to one singular success they've had in putting something, to rest that satisfies both sides? You see what is going on between Congo and Rwanda. But is it in the news? You see the Nigerian crisis, Boko Haram and the rest of the country. Is it in the news, global news? But everybody's jumping up and down about Ukraine and Russia. No, I don't care. If my neighbor is setting themselves on fire, to be honest with you, I really don't care. I just want to make sure the fire doesn't extend to my home. Because sometimes when you unduly involve yourself in something that has nothing to do with you, then the people think, oh, it's your duty to come and do it. We should focus on our own.
Finally, sorry to interrupt you, but for purposes of time, I want to quickly chip this in, or really ask you this finally. To juxtapose President Joe Biden's foreign policy with domestic policy, you say you're at the border. The Republicans say, and I think your governor, is it Greg Abbott, says, yes. Yeah, you're right, says that there's a huge crisis and there's a child trafficking crisis at the Mexican border. The film Sound of Freedom, which is the Jim Caviezel film Sound of Freedom, which has made over $100 million at the box office, eclipsing at the beginning Indiana Jones, was a true depiction of Tim Ballard's efforts to stop child trafficking, sex trafficking from the porous borders of Texas. Is that true that about 100 unassisted minors crossed from Mexico into Texas, and from there about 85,000 of them are missing and no one knows where they are in the United States?
Anything that is put out by the media, you have to be very suspicious of it. Is it coming from the liberal side of it, or is it coming from the Republican side? The conservative side of it. All those things are true. Again, I'm involved, in some kind of law enforcement association, and we see those statistics, and it makes you wonder if the most advanced or the number one country in the world is having, such a crisis. Then what goes on in other parts of the world? That is what shocks me about America. When I left Nigeria, I was the belief that this is the country that, at least decency exists in certain things. But you come over here, you see trafficking, you see sex abuse, you see all kinds of things that makes you wonder, is this really, the country that I read in the books or magazines before I came? But it's real. We see it. You go to our courts, and what cases do you have? Adults abusing kids. Sex is a big thing in America. And, they traffic kids. You saw the Jeff Epstein thing, where there were some very powerful men that were, being patronizing what he was doing, but because those people don't want to be shamed, their name are being kept out of the public eye. So, so the world is in a crisis. Not America. It's not exclusive to America. Then America say they're number one country in the world. Then imagine what goes on in the third world or the fifth world.
Yes.
So indeed. We have to. That's why I come back and said we have to be more responsible. We don't have to look up to anybody to guide us as to what is good. You defend your home, you commit to your home, and then you insist that certain things are done right. But anytime you're going to start depending on somebody else to come and give you the solution you need, you're going to wait for a long time, or you're going to pay heavy, price for it.
Indeed.
So,
the United States also remains the biggest, one of the biggest allies of Ukraine. But we'll have to leave it there for purposes of time. Thank you so much for the time you have shared with us and your opinions and your insight, Mr. Mr. Edward Okpa, who joined us from Dallas in Texas. Much appreciated. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me, and good luck to you.
After the break, United States says officials will attend Ukraine peace summit in Saudi Arabia. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome to the So For More stretch of today's special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. U.S. government officials will attend a Ukraine peace summit in Saudi Arabia. That's according to the State Department spokesman Matthew Miller, adding he could not give more details. The Wall Street Journal reported last week that Saudi Arabia would invite Western states, Ukraine, and major developing countries to the talks. President Vladimir Zelensky's chief of staff, Andriy Yermak, said officials from a number of countries were preparing to meet in Saudi Arabia to discuss President Zelensky's peace plan for Ukraine based on the departure of all Russian troops.
To answer that question, we do, of course, support this summit. We have long said that it is important that Ukraine be in the driver's seat when it comes to any potential diplomatic resolution to this war. It's important that countries that have not yet heard directly from Ukraine hear from Ukraine. So we are gratified that there will be countries that will be attending this summit to talk directly with Ukraine. If your question was with respect to what other countries will be attending, I would defer to the governments of Saudi Arabia and Ukraine to answer that question. If the question is respect, I'm coming to you. You don't have to jump in. If the question is with respect to what U.S. government officials will be attending, I can confirm that there will be U.S. government officials not ready to make announcements yet about who those will be. But as the week goes on, certainly you can expect that we will do so.
Russian opposition politician Vladimir Kara-Murza has lost an appeal against his 25-year jail sentence. Mr. Kara-Murza, who holds Russian and British citizenship, has failed, or rather was jailed, for 25 years in April for treason and spreading false information about Russia's war in Ukraine. The 41-year-old is one of a small number of prominent opposition figures who stayed in Russia and continue to speak out against President Vladimir Putin after the Kremlin sent tens of thousands of troops into Ukraine in February 2022. During his trial, he compared the wording of the charges against him with that used by Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin's secret police in the 1930s, when Kara-Murza's own grandfather was sent to a gulag prison camp in Russia's Far East. Twice, in 2015 and 2017, he suddenly fell ill in what he said was poisoning by the Russian security services. On both occasions, failing, or rather falling, into a coma before eventually recovering. However, Russian authorities denied involvement in the incidents. Now we turn our attention to the world of business as it affects the war in Ukraine. Our Channels Television business correspondent, Ini John Mekwa, is with me in the studio. Ini, good morning.
Good morning.
Now, here we are, over 500 days into this war, and the story remains the same, albeit even getting worse, obviously because the war continues.
Yeah.
But the Russian inflation is to exceed the target of 4%.
Yes.
Could you explain this to us?
Yeah, well, I guess it's expected because even though Russia has very well been managing its economy in the midst of sanctions and in the midst of the adverse effects of the war and, the consequences of it, we've seen Russia dole out a lot of buffer to the manufacturers and the rail sector, the transport, even the aircraft the aviation sector. But I mean, when it comes to the issue of inflation, that's increase in price, then there's so many factors that contribute to it. So we know that a lot of Russians left, especially when the conscription, was at the height of it. Even though they have a new law now, I think they're working on that. But at this time,
it's even worse now.
Yeah,
the draft age is being extended, so that more people
can be captured into that. Well, so what has happened? One of the consequences of that is that you have labor leaving Russia. And where there's no labor, then I don't know how you get production. I know we're talking about AI these days, but you still need human beings. So what has happened is they can hardly meet up with supply of goods and services needed in Russia. And when you have, I know you said I'm going primary again, and when you don't have enough production, you don't have enough supply, that means that the little you have will be at a very high prices. That's what inflation is. So that's what has happened. And the same inflation might go, the target is supposed to be 4%, is now about 5%, and so might likely hit 5.8 to 6% even this year, because more and more we see less production, less labor to meet up with the demand that's even there, perhaps the women and children. And so we see more inflationary pressure holding there.
So is this pretty inevitable for Russia?
Well, I don't see it any other way, because I mean it's not rocket science. It's just the normal thing. If there is demand, then there has to be supply. But if you don't have the factors that bring up the supply, you don't have the labor, you don't have people who bring the capital, then of course there won't be supply, and that's what you have.
Except they ramp up AI and we start having
AI,
we have robots to replace human beings in a second.
You need human beings to make the robots, to write the programs. So it begins with human beings. They're not even maintenance of the AI.
Yeah, I mentioned that in the way that the world is not even ready for that.
Yeah.
Not to talk of Russia in a war situation.
In a war situation with so much distraction.
You also mentioned the e-visas for Indians to Russia. Yesterday you mentioned the fact that Russia was extending
a waiver for
Africans to come to Russia,
yes.
Russia obviously will not be the most attractive tourist destination at this time.
Don't say that to Nigerians. I'm telling you, you might have a lot of people who still go there. For instance, Indians are going there now. And if they remove that waiver, we are Nigerians, we hustle. If we see hustling opportunities there, trust me, you will hear that a lot of Nigerians have gone to Russia.
Even in a war situation?
Well, the war is not in Russia. The war is going on in Ukraine.
But they are effectively at war.
Oh, obviously. But I mean, we have thick skin. We know how to get through all of this. So now, but you have India. They could go to Russia using e-visa, so that makes it easier for them. It's not just India. I think about 50 other countries will also be affected. So
are we talking workers or tourists?
Tourists, more of tourists,
okay.
I think. But of course, short stay, not the long stay. So I guess Russia is just trying to look for revenue in different ways. And that's why yesterday when we were talking about the goodies that Russia is offering Africa, I asked, and we had the conversation with an economist on Business Morning right after, and he also said, we have to be careful because, okay, look at Russia, their inflation is high, their revenue is dwindling, they are threatened with sanctions from everywhere, their oligarchs are being targeted, and then suddenly they're offering you a free meal. They also need that free meal, so that meal may most likely not really be free. You need to look out for the price because they also have their issues in spite of their ingenuity in managing the economy. The economy is still feeling the impact of the war, directly or indirectly. So, let's look closely. We know that in the case of India now, they've been quite open. They're opening some of their companies in India. Some of those companies are now open in India. They are taking some of their businesses right there.
To India.
And they're also inviting India to come to Russia and do business with them. India is a major importer of their crude at this time when the world is turning their backs at Russia. So, it's a win-win situation. We see it there. But in the case of Africa, what are we offering them?
Well, we have our Vice President Kashim Shettima,
yes,
who was one of the president's front and center there. So if we're in good hands, he's a shrewd politician and a thinker. So he'd know, for instance, if it was a bait that has too much of a negative consequence if Russia and Nigeria get into dealings as far as aid is concerned, that will, at the end of the day, will not make Nigeria
yeah, that'll be detrimental. I want to believe so.
Another thing you mentioned, China is also a port of call for some Russian businesses. There's a Russian jeweler that opened in China because they couldn't find that sort of business anywhere else. Do you think that Russia sees Africa as that sort of hub? Maybe not for luxury goods like jewelry, but other sorts of goods that they can open shop in some African countries,
that would be nice.
Like maybe South Africa.
That would be nice.
Egypt,
you know, when you talk about jewelry and precious gold, and we know that India has cheap labor because of their population. So we do know that for years, Russia's companies for jewelry, for precious, for diamonds, they were operating in India. They were right there in India providing employment for Indians. You know, I mean, what I'm trying to say is, I mean, if you're an economist, what you look out for is what do you bring? Like now they say willing buyer, willing seller. What do you bring to the table? What do you take away from the table? But when it looks like one party is bringing all the goodies to the table and you're just coming to pick up, then most likely you're paying for it indirectly, and that might be more expensive. So if Russia is coming to do business in, I mean, Africa also has labor. Africa has labor. In the next couple of years, Africa is going to be the most populated continent. You understand? So if Russia is coming to Africa, you know, they're coming to do business, bringing their companies here because they feel there's cheap labor here, then it's obvious to everyone we are winning. You know, you're bringing it here, you're bringing your expertise and your equipment and your capital, and you're creating employment. And from there, of course, some of the revenue, because you pay taxes, will go into the continent. But if we don't see that and we just see you giving us freebies, then we should be wary of it.
Yes, indeed. Saudi Arabia Peace Summit, and that's something that I spoke to our guest about. We also reported it's something that Russia has not been invited to. And it's also something that the Ukraine president is involved in with Saudi Arabia and other developing countries in Africa. Do you know would you know whether Nigeria is involved? And
well, I don't know if Nigeria is directly involved in this, but I mean, I think there are many sides to that story, because when we look at the global oil production now, Saudi Arabia and Russia, both members of OPEC Plus, had an agreement kind of, because Russia has cut its oil production by 500,000 barrels a day. Saudi Arabia by 1 million. In fact, they've just extended it to September. And both of them had this agreement because they want to influence the price of oil, which of course, you know, will make them earn more. So now, if the same Saudi Arabia, which on one hand seems to be working with Russia, is arranging or organizing a peace summit, and Russia, who is supposed to be their, you know, partner when it comes to oil and gas, they are not invited, then perhaps it is an incomplete summit. Because if you really want to bring peace, then obviously all parties should be involved, except the other party had said they refuse to be involved.
No, they're not even in the plans.
Which makes it even difficult. How do you broker peace when all the parties at war are not there?
Good question. And we hope that Ukraine has the answer. Thank you.
Hopefully. Thank you.
John Merkur, please join us on Business Morning after the program. In the meantime, when we return, lots of cakes, carrots, fruits as birthday celebrations held at Moscow Zoo for 2 giant pandas. Not a Kung Fu panda. Welcome to the final stretch of today's special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. Members of the United Nations Security Council are urging Russia to withdraw its troops from Ukraine's internationally recognized territory. Ukraine's representative says Russia's actions pose a substantial threat to stability in the region and worldwide.
We fearlessly confront the Russian aggressor state, whose actions pose a substantial threat to stability in the region and worldwide. It is crucial to remember that Russia's testing of international law long predates its invasion of Ukraine in 2014. Lack of the world's adequate response to Russia's invasion in Georgia back in 2008 only encouraged Moscow to escalate further based on this dangerous precedent. Ukraine remains steadfast in its pursuit of liberating its sovereign territory within internationally recognized borders and freeing our citizens from the horrors of Russian occupation. This endeavor is not just a right, but also a duty, an obligation to protect fellow UN members from similar ordeals.
Mr. President, listening to Russia's remarks today, some might be confused about who is the aggressor and who is the victim. Since the beginning of Russia's brutal, full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the international community has been clear. Over 140 countries have repeatedly condemned the Russian Federation for its aggression against Ukraine and demanded that Russia withdraw its military forces from Ukraine's internationally recognized territory. We've listened carefully to Russia's remarks, and it's clear that its efforts to divert the Council's attention from the core issues at hand are a transparent ploy to distract from its own aggression.
We should never lose sight on the root cause. We all know the indisputable fact that if Russia had not initiated the current aggression, the tragedy we are witnessing now would never have happened. Russia must stop its hopeless attempt to deceive the international community. It will never justify its outrageous act. Instead, it should fulfill its responsibilities as a permanent member of the Security Council.
Russia's claim that it is Ukrainian aggression that is in any way responsible for the ongoing war in Ukraine is absurd. It is a projection of the behavior of the Russian state itself. There is only one aggressor in this war. We have all seen hundreds of thousands of Russian troops invading that sovereign country, illegally and unprovoked. We all know that the right to self-defense in those circumstances is enshrined in the UN Charter. And it is Russia that is sending thousands of its own young men to their deaths. Estimates suggest that more than 200,000 Russian soldiers have been killed or injured in Ukraine. Russia is inflicting terror on the Ukrainian people, and in parallel, it is inflicting suffering on its own population and millions across the world.
Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, is getting ready to say goodbye to the country's most prominent remnant of the Soviet past, a huge hammer and sickle emblazoned on a shield held by a huge statue towering over the city. Industrial climbers worked on Sunday on top of the 62-meter motherland statue, Europe's highest, cut off, brought to the ground, one of the two wreaths of emmer wheat featuring above hammer and sickle. The traditional Soviet emblem will be replaced by a trident, a three-pronged emblem of Ukraine that has been welded by metal workers in the Ukrainian capital. It will replace the hammer and sickle in time for August 24th, Ukraine's Independence Day.
Дуже символічно.
And finally on the program, a festive atmosphere filled the Moscow Zoo as crowds of fans gathered to celebrate the birthdays of Ruyi and Ding Ding, two beloved giant pandas who've been living in Russia since 2019 for a 15-year stay. Ruyi, a male panda, marked his 7th birthday, while Ding Ding, a female panda, turned 6. The pandas seem to be thoroughly enjoying their birthday treats, including their favorite bamboo shoots and an especially made ice cake made of carrots, fruits, and bamboo shoots adorned with flower petals, banners, and flags. They occasionally pause to rest and relax amidst the excitement of the celebration. Flocks of fans gathered around the panda enclosure to catch a glimpse of the two pandas enjoying their special day, adding to the joyful atmosphere of the celebration. weren't told whether those pandas know Kung Fu. That's where we leave it on today's special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Have a good day. Please join us again tomorrow.